Welcome back. Some argue that the less access to guns, the more safe our society. But it seems that the criminal always seems to get the gun, while the law-abiding citizen ends up being the sitting duck. Discussing gun control with me today is Anthony Calandro of Gun for Hire, attorney Richard Luzzi, and Essex County resident Beverly Yoskowitz. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Anthony, my big issue is that the criminal is always going to get the gun. And how can us law-abiding citizens maintain our Second Amendment right?
Well, first of all, if you don't exercise your Second Amendment right, you should go out and get your firearms ID card. You should go out and get your permit to purchase a handgun. You should take some classes. You should own a gun. And you should start voting for stricter laws against criminals as opposed to voting for stricter laws against law-abiding citizens, which has been the norm in New Jersey for the past 40 years or so.
And Beverly, what are some of your feelings about people owning guns?
My feelings as a citizen, as just a citizen of this great state, is that I want the government to protect me. I want government protection. I don't want to end my rights to gun ownership, but I like the fact that there is a background check. I like the fact that the state will do a absolute against the law decision. They will make that decision that you cannot own a gun if you are mentally ill, if you have committed a crime, if you're a felon. And if you've shown that you're a danger to society in any other capacity. I think that I'm happy that the state does protect my rights as a citizen.
Right. I don't think anyone would argue with you. I don't believe that really just anyone should have a gun. Anthony, you can probably speak again on that issue.
Well, the Supreme Court, 2 times now in the history of the United States, has ruled that it is not the police or the government's job to protect you. Colonel Jeff Cooper once said, when you need help in seconds, the police arrive in minutes. Normally, Beverly, the police are there to take the report after the crime is committed. So our slant is that we want firearms for self-protection for ourselves and to keep the law-abiding citizens in limbo, not knowing who has a firearm or not, which makes for a much politer and safer environment.
Right, and getting back to that, I mean, when we have the gun-free school zone, it's the criminal already knows that no one there has a gun, and we've had these massacres on campus, and the problem is that the person doing the shooting actually has time to stop, reload, and continue shooting because no one there has a gun to protect the students there. Rich, would you like to speak to that?
Well, that's exactly correct. And there was an incident just a few years ago at a church out west, I don't recall what state it was in, where a criminal came in. He was bound and determined to shoot as many people as he could within that church, and luckily there was an off-duty guard there that had a gun, and she took him down after he had already killed 2 people, but it could have been a lot worse.
Exactly. Go ahead, Beverly.
I'd like to say that I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't say that a person shouldn't have the right to own a gun. What I'm saying is unfettered right doesn't make sense to me. The state has to, this is a state issue, not a federal issue. Every state has its own laws on gun ownership. But our Bill of Rights allows, and the Second Amendment, gun ownership. I agree with that. But I don't believe that any state should just allow guns in the back of a pickup truck, or you can go into a store and not register, or you can just not be enforcing the law. I think that when a felon comes in to buy a gun, I think it behooves the store owner to report it to the police immediately. That's against the law. That enforcement doesn't really take place. It just takes place that you don't get a gun. But I believe that a person who is not complying with the law should be arrested as quickly as possible. And
I think that we can agree with that. What happens when there are more restrictive gun laws, what happens to our crime rate, which I think people don't understand? Where does the crime rate go when law-abiding citizens have more restrictive gun control laws? Anthony?
The crime rate goes up. There's a book by John Lott, More Guns, Less Crime, which statistically proves in the state of New Jersey, as well as the other 49 states, any states that have the restrictive gun laws have the highest crime rate. Chicago comes to mind. Washington, D.C. comes to mind, which was pivotal, which was decisive in the McDonald and Heller case, which Rich would talk more about because that's his specialty.
Right, and Rich, if you could speak on that case, please.
Well, in the Heller case, it was a Second Amendment case in the District of Columbia. So the issue in that case was you had to have a license for a handgun in your home. And if you had, in order to have the license and have the gun legally in your home, the gun had to be either disassembled or it had to have a trigger lock on it. So it wasn't much use as a self-defense weapon if a criminal breaks in and you have to unlock your gun. And the court found that, yes, you have a Second Amendment right to self-defense, but that only applied to the District of Columbia, and technically speaking. It didn't apply to the states. The McDonald case was a similar case. It was very restrictive gun rights. And getting back to your point, from the time that those very restrictive gun laws, from the time those gun restrictions were in place, the crime rate actually went up in that time period. And the McDonald case applied through the 14th Amendment that the right to bear arms as an individual right to all the states in the United States.
Thank you, Rich. My other point is, our founding fathers put this as the Second Amendment, and there must be a reason why it comes right after the first, because of its level of importance. Thomas Jefferson said, at the very least, this is our last defense against a tyrannical government. So, Anthony, would you like to speak on that?
Well, you see what's going on in the Middle East right now. Every one of these countries that is having uprisings against their government, they are unarmed countries. So basically the only people who are armed are the government and the military. And to prevent tyranny, we need an armed society. The Second Amendment, I agree with you 100%, was written as the Second Amendment because it's just as important as the First. If we did not have a Second Amendment, we'd have no First Amendment in this country.
I just want to speak on that issue because I run into this with a number of gun owners. And yes, it's true that we need a Second Amendment to prevent tyranny. The problem is that when the Second Amendment was written, the type of weapon that the government had and the type of weapon that the citizen had were essentially the same. Now you can see with what's happening in Libya that the type of weapon that the citizen there has, which we don't even have, which are AK-47s, is no match for a tank, nor is it a match for air power where they're dropping bombs. So I don't know that a Second Amendment in that case is going to prevent us from a tyrannical government because their weapons are much more effective.
Right, Beverly, go ahead.
I would like to just say I want to just expand on that. That is very true. The gun weapons that they use, for the criminals use, are very, very military. Mm-hmm. And the gun weapons that the police have or that a citizen has might not be. However, I believe it is very important to, just as you get a driver's license, I believe it is very important to know how to use a gun before you buy a gun, before you carry a gun. I think that should be part of the law. I can't understand why a person should, we're insane if we just think there should be unfettered rights to a gun, that anybody, man, woman, child, they have the right to a gun. I think there should be some laws that protect the citizens. And the first law should be that if a person who is a criminal walks into a gun store, that should be reported immediately. Secondly of all, I really truly believe a person should know how to use a gun, and there should be a license for a gun when they know how to use it. Without that, I think it's insanity.
Anthony, can you speak to some of the gun control laws that we already have on the books in New Jersey?
Well, New Jersey has some of the toughest, if not the toughest, and most draconian gun laws in the entire nation. We have a full level of background checks. We have a full level of mental health checks. Sue Ann, if you had taken, an antidepressant when you were 16 years old, it would exclude you right now from owning a firearm legally. You would have to hire a lawyer and spend $10,000, $20,000 to try to get that overturned so that you could purchase a gun. We have very, very strict gun laws in the state of New Jersey.
And some of the other issues, the other buzz that seems to be coming up is this global ban from the UN on handguns. Is there any truth to this, and what would be the process if that were ever to come to fruition?
This is one of these items where there is truth to the UN with a treaty to ban all of handguns, because the UN, if you ever pass the UN, you see they have a revolver on the front lawn with the barrel tied in a knot. So what does that tell you automatically?
They'd like to see the
That's
end of
the
handguns.
sculpture. That's the sculpture we have, and it would be much easier for United Nations troops to come into this country and take guns away from us than it would be for our own troops to take guns away from us. So yes, there is truth to this whole global gun grab.
People see the Second Amendment maybe as something that's not so important, and that just having a gun is something that's so dangerous. But I think we're illustrating really how important it is to have that right to our freedoms and our liberties in the country. Rich?
On the handgun, it's particularly important to know that both the Heller case and the McDonald case were specific about handguns, because those were the guns that were at issue. And the court said that is the type of gun, looking at historically, you need the type of weapon that is used generally to protect yourself. And since handguns are used so widely in the United States for self-protection, they specifically protect that weapon. So I don't think we have to worry about the United Nations unless NATO or the United Nations has its own army that's going to try and invade us.
Right. Well, I guess as we become more global, that could be an issue coming down the pike, I would imagine.
Correct.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for being with us and speaking about the
Thank you.
importance of the Second Amendment and gun control in our state. Thank you.
Thank you.